Oh, Matt,
How are you?
fine tonight and yourself.
Very well, thank you.
You're looking good for a young man.
Well, I'm feeling quite well, thank you. I'm a little relieved that tonight has finally come.
Okay. Well, glad to see you.
I'm glad to be seen, as the old joke goes.
And, thank you again for putting in the time and doing this. It was a very strong commitment on your part.
I enjoy doing it, Bob. I'm glad to provide something for the temple.
Excellent, excellent. All right. I'm sure it makes your son proud as well. So that's all good.
Yeah, he and Allison were up visiting this weekend. We had a very nice time with them.
Oh, great. Is there anything special about tonight that I should know or do or anything that?
No, and as you know, I haven't sent you any particular um, videos or anything like that. Yeah. But I will mention something later on that the temple might be interested in viewing.
What's that?
I will discuss the SS St. Louis
Right.
that was turned back by the American administration.
Yeah.
There, Robert, his name is written down, I forgot, Krakow or something like that, has written a play. And they have, in the play, there is a trial of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It goes back to the refusal of members of the State Department to allow Jews to enter this country, even though the Jewish quota had not yet been reached, in accordance with the then restrictive laws from 1924. I'm going to turn off the overhead light, see how that looks.
Oh, all right. Yeah, it looks better.
Yeah, and we're getting a little sunlight remaining with the rays from this, but I think that will
Disappear, I know.
Yeah, no, actually, that's even better.
Oh, okay. You're saying St. Louis.
Henry Morgenthau Jr., Treasury Secretary under Roosevelt, received information from members of his staff that the Secretary of State's office and people like Breckinridge Long, who was tasked with the responsibility of handling immigration, which should actually be read as denying immigration, and also Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State. They all had either anti-Semitic views or they simply didn't want any Jews to come into the country.
Oh, wow.
And this was demonstrated to such an extent that the members of Morgenthau's staff, with his approval, provided a report on the acquiescence of the administration in the murder of European Jews.
Wow.
Well, that was a bombshell.
Yeah.
Subsequently, they watered it down a little bit because the report demonstrated the ways and means with which the administration's Secretary of State was really torpedoing efforts to get Jews out, including there had been an unsuccessful bill, the Robert Wagner, and there was another senator whose name had been attached to it. I'll have it when I look at my actual notes when I make the presentation. But there was so much territory to cover that I didn't want to send any other stuff, because this will be very fact intensive tonight. And hopefully we won't put anybody to sleep. Okay. But anyway, as part of this presentation that I viewed through the JCA in Sarasota, Florida, there was an actual portrayal of a trial of FDR And it essentially shows how Roosevelt was desirous of running in 1940 for re-election. That would be his third term, as well as 1944. And because he was ambitious, he didn't want to offend anybody. So therefore, the Southern Democratic senators were not particularly happy about Jews coming into the country, particularly the dispossessed of Germany. And we had already gone through the Evian Conference in 1938, where nobody, including the United States and Britain, didn't want to take in Jews. Oh, and it's noteworthy that our ambassador to Great Britain was Joe Kennedy, who was a noted anti-Semite.
Hmm.
And of course, he was a potential contender for the presidency. He had aspirations for that. He was a Catholic, of course, and so was Al Smith. Al Smith failed. Joe Kennedy thought he could buy his election. And so by sending Kennedy to Britain, he got him out of the country because he could have been a formidable opponent. And Huey Long was making a lot of noise at that time. So he didn't want to bring in more Jews because the cry would be that we don't have enough jobs. We're still fighting our way out of the Depression in 38. So there were arguments, plus the fact they said, well, you know, this restricted immigration law doesn't permit us to bring anybody in.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, there was a significant number of Americans who didn't like Jews. Anti-Semitism in terms of people's attitudes was very strong. So there were a variety of reasons why the president wasn't particularly interested in hearing something on a public basis. Anyway, there is a movie called Complicit, and it tells the story with a couple of people who are now in their 70s or 80s, who were infants on the vessel, the St. Louis.
Uh-huh.
And so you've got this personal, impact of these people, and then they give their viewpoints about what had happened, and then they have this trial of FDR, and it's quite effective. That may be politically incorrect,
Mm-hmm.
but the point is that in 30, in his, 1940, 1936, 1932, when he first ran for office, he got 82% of the Jewish vote. By 1940 and 44, he had 92% of the vote.
Wow.
So, and the State Department and Roosevelt kept the plight of European Jewry quiet. They did not have any public information on it. So that might be an interesting educational program because it tells the story of the St. Louis, for those who don't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the tie-in here is that when you take into consideration the Evian Conference, where 30 odd nations were asked to take in Jews and nobody actually said they would do so. And then 1939, you have the St. Louis affair. Meanwhile, Goebbels is saying that no one will take the Jews because nobody likes them. And then in 1942, you have the Wannsee Conference just outside Berlin, when the final solution was decided, using the word evacuation as a euphemism for extermination.
Hmm.
So
is this a movie, or what is this that you're suggesting about the St. Louis? Or is this the trial? You're talking about the trial. Which is it?
This is a movie about the St. Louis.
Okay.
And within the movie, there is this
Oh, I see.
this play written by the director, and
What's the name of it? You know?
it's called Complicit.
Listen, I'll write it down.
Yeah. It's provocative,
Right.
but it tells a story. There is a book called The Jews Should Keep Quiet.
Uh-huh.
It's written by Raphael Medoff, and the subtitle, Franklin D. Roosevelt, Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, and the Holocaust. And Stephen Wise was kind of kept at arm's length by Roosevelt because Wise had been giving Roosevelt information long in advance of other public information about the plight of Jewry in Germany and Europe in general.
Mm-hmm.
And he was Wise was somewhat intimidated by Roosevelt, did not wish to offend Roosevelt, so he never really pulled the trigger, so to speak, in pushing the president to do something about it or to go public with the information that he had. Anyway,
It's quite a story.
it is quite a story. So how is your week going?
Just fine. Just fine. Dealing with the ups and downs of the weather, and other than that, all's fine.
We've had a very wet,
Right.
yeah, the month of July, we were down about 12 to 13 inches in terms of annual rainfall through July.
I
And
bet you made that up.
Yeah, we have. We've regained like 8 to 9 inches. So it's been very wet. And if you're a golfer, it's not nice.
No. Makes it a little tougher to play.
Yes, it is. Definitely is.
Did James bring any kids with him when he came to visit, or
No, the kids are all away.
other at camp?
Alex and Andy are up at Camp Winnebago in Maine, and
Oh,
Jamie and Allison came up. The weekend they would ordinarily come up if they had visiting weekend, but they've canceled that.
I see. Because of COVID?
Yeah, because of COVID. Yeah. That seems to be the protocol that everybody is observing. To
Yeah,
keep
it's a shame.
Yeah. But it's great that the kids are able to get away, and I
Mhm.
guess if that's the price you got to pay,
Mm-hmm.
then so be it.
Right. Well, I'm glad that they're enjoying themselves. And you, at the end of next month are the high holidays, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, and our plan is to join you for the holidays.
Yeah.
My wife and I would love to come down, and that is our plan.
Great.
I enjoy your services.
I'm glad to hear that.
I think Rabbi Fine is a wonderful spiritual leader, and I admire his intellect and his knowledge.
Yes, he is very knowledgeable. So I think it's Labor Day night, starts the holidays.
Yeah, boy, talk about being early.
Yep. And we're the month of September is holidays and done. So that'll make it difficult for Jewish day schools. We're trying to figure out when to start.
Yeah.
September will be full of holidays, and then October on, there'll be smooth sailing.
My plan is to get all the items in that we talked about.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Maybe not too much about the KKK and white supremacy
Okay.
and stuff that's.
Where are you starting?
I'm going to give a brief summary of the first and second lectures, just to
All right.
because
Review.
maybe getting some new, some for review purposes, and then we'll get into. I have a grim fairy tale to read to everybody.
Cool.
Because they were mentioned by the Grimm brothers were mentioned by name,
Uh-huh.
and you can easily discern the word enmity and the many examples in literature that we can find,
Mm-hmm.
and even in terms of Mother Goose stories.
I did hear something about the Grimm fairy tales, and I do remember that.
Yeah.
All right, we got a few more minutes for people to
Sure.
join us. And speaking of James, he'll be joining us.
I
Hello,
know
James.
him.
Welcome.
Did you leave sunglasses here? James?
He's connecting.
Yeah. Connecting to audio.
Right. I'm not sure why he's struggling, but he's struggling.
I am struggling. I'm going to try that.
There you go.
Anyway. Hey, hello. Good to see you again. I'm going to try to dial in again. My phone was giving me trouble.
Oh, well, we can hear you.
Well, that's good.
Hope everyone is well on this lovely summer evening. It's about 85 to 90 degrees here.
Wow.
It's be the same tomorrow, but it's supposed to see some rain on Wednesday maybe, but today and tomorrow we're rain free, at least in this neck of the woods. Anyhow. So we're in the middle of summer, and I was saying to Matt that I think it's 6 weeks and it's Rosh Hashanah, 1, 2, 3. So get your apples and honey ready because Rosh Hashanah is around the corner. It's suddenly people are going to wake up on the 29th of August. And say, what's the holidays doing here?
There won't be any time to make matzo balls.
Really, I mean, we'll finish the summer and boom, people will not know what hit them. They come into school and they're becoming the shul in shorts.
I think most kids do now anyway.
It could be the parents too. You never know. That it's a little tough to come off the summer weather and summer behavior and suddenly feel the formality of synagogue. But it'll be here before you know it. So it's a 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that, as soon as we hit the end of this month, everyone's pushing for the back to school and preparation for the holidays, and boom, we're going to be in full swing and all figuring out how to deal with COVID and
Yeah.
how that's going to affect everyone as we get into the fall with this reflection of a pandemic spiking again. So we're at 7:32. Let me welcome everyone this evening and welcome Matt for his third installment of Anti-Semitism. And let me again express my appreciation for Matt taking the time to put himself together in preparation for this program and to talk about anti-Semitism. Matt's going to start this evening with a little bit of review, and then we're going to get into more contemporary times. Some of them will begin to share memories that we might have of our personal experiences. I can remember some, and we will talk more about the reflection of, again, these, as they called in this week's Parsha, the stiff-necked people, which even God didn't like. So we'll talk about these Jews and anti-Semitism and how society dealt with them. So good evening, Matt, and I give you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I apologize for this glare. I'm going to be doing some reading tonight. And so in order to get close to my lamp here, I probably will cause a lot more glare than I'd like to. If I sit back here, it won't be as bad, but bear with me, look away, get comfortable, and nice to have you with us. To get started tonight, I would like to give a bit of a review. In our first session, we talked about ancient times. We spoke about the, this someone I know. Hi, Rabbi. Hi, Leah. In ancient times, dealing with the Egyptians, we learned that the Jewish garrison in Elephantine, Egypt, where there was an actual synagogue and altar for sacrifice, that altar was destroyed by the Egyptians because the Jews offended the gods of the pagan Egyptians. Jews were different, and the story of the people was that the Jews were impious, they were impure, they worshiped one God, which was a ridiculous notion when everybody else had so many other gods. And the bottom line was that the word enmity is a word that I emphasized in the first discussion, or misanthropy. And they attribute a lot of that to Moses, who they claimed taught the Jews or directed them to be hostile to other nations. Well, this is nonsense, but this was a part of the narrative of the Egyptian people. They would have that the Jews were expelled, not that the Jews left Egypt because of signs and wonders and the victory of monotheism over paganism. So the point that was made by Nuremberg, whom I relied upon, was that for several reasons, the Jews were an unappreciated people. And similarly, when the Hellenistic society overtook Egypt with the victories of Alexander the Great, the historians amongst the Greeks picked up these stories and rumors and codified them, put them down in writing. And there were 4 or 5 of them. And they all said basically the same thing. They were not historians as we understand historians. They basically were recorders of legends and folk tales, if you will. And folk tales will be an important part of tonight because I'm going to read you one of Grimm's fairy tales. So through repetition over the course of several centuries, going back at least 14 to 1500 years ago, the pattern was set. The Jews were a people who were disliked because of their alleged enmity. And of course, in turn, the nations that regarded the Jews as such, they regarded the Jews with equal enmity. And by the time of the Romans, it was pretty much the same story all over again. When we get to Christianity, we learn some new words like deicide, desecration of hosts, although that did come somewhat later. But in the process of individuation, when the Christian church evolved after Jesus's death, there were stories about Jesus's life, his ministry, and his death. And they were codified, if you will, or written down as the Gospels. And the Gospels were, to our eternal discredit, the playbook by which Jews have been vilified for at least 2,000 years. And I refer to the claim, the charge, the lie, the 2,000-year-old lie that the Jews had killed Jesus. And in particular, we cited Matthew 27:25, in which all of Jewry is implicated by his blood, meaning Jesus's blood, be on our heads. And at the end of last week's program, we watched the trial scene in The Merchant of Venice, in which Shylock utters those very words, so that you have a playing out in drama the literature of Shakespeare in the English language, the same words that you find in the Gospel of Matthew, and in regard to the others as other Gospels as well. During the administration, or I should say the ministry of Paul, there are more stories in his letters to several of the Jewish communities who were now accepting the divinity of Jesus. And in his admonitions to these folks, we find new doctrines, namely that the covenant that God made with Abraham was abrogated. The Jews, because they didn't accept Jesus, have lost the favor of God. Therefore, they have been superseded. And the doctrine of supersession, that Christianity has eclipsed Judaism, is a prevailing thought in Christian theology. We mentioned a couple of the Christian fathers, or the early fathers of the church, and I mentioned St. Augustine for one who I mentioned by name, but didn't really quote. I'm going to quote now, John Chrysostom, who lived 344 to 407 of the Common Era. He was one of the, quote, greatest church fathers, known as the Golden Mouth. He was a missionary preacher famous for his sermons and addresses. And this is the nice things he had to say about Judaism. The synagogue is worse than a brothel. It is a den of scoundrels and the repair of wild beasts, the temple of demons devoted to idolatrous cults, the refuge of brigands and debauchees, and the cabin of devils. It is a criminal assembly of Jews, a place of meeting for the assassins of Christ, a house worse than a drinking shop, a den of thieves, a house of ill fame, a dwelling of iniquity, the refuge of devils, a gulf and an abyss of perdition. I would say the same things about their souls. As for me, I hate the synagogue. I hate the Jews for the same reason. Pretty strong stuff. And Peter the Venerable, and I don't have the years in which he lived. Yes, you Jews, I say, do I address you, you who till this very day deny the Son of God? How long, poor wretches, will ye not believe the truth? Truly I doubt whether a Jew can be really human. I lead out from its den a monstrous animal. and show it as a laughingstock in the amphitheater of the world, in the sight of all people. I bring thee forward, thou Jew, thou brute beast, in the sight of all men. This is from The Roots of Christian Anti-Semitism by Malcolm Hay. And all of these lovely.
Where'd it go?
Mr. Goldfarb, we can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
I think you, okay.
Can you hear me now? Okay, that's good. Somebody give me a key word that I had just read so I'll know where I am.
I'm going to wait. I want to wait it out. I don't really know if I'm going to get it.
Lynn Goldfarb.
And not surprisingly, or maybe.
Well,
You had
I'm
left off with Peter the Venerable.
Yes.
okay. Did I give the quotation?
No.
Okay. So I'll give you Peter the Venerable. Yes, you Jews, I say, do I address you? You who to this very day deny the Son of God? How long, poor wretches, will ye not believe the truth? Truly, I doubt whether a Jew can be really human. I lead out from its den of a monstrous animal and show it as a laughingstock in the amphitheater of the world, in the sight of all people. I bring thee forward, thou Jew, thou brute beast, in the sight of all men. Again, very much like the Egyptians. You don't like my gods, I don't like you. But there's much more of a venomous twist to the regard. And one more from Martin Luther, the father of Protestantism, and in particular, the Lutheran persuasion. Luther wrote this in 1543 in a treatise called On the Jews and Their Lies. What then shall we Christians do with this damned, rejected race of Jews? Since they live among us and we know about their lying and blasphemy and cursing, we cannot tolerate them if we do not wish to share in their lies, curses, and blasphemy. In this way, we cannot quench the inextinguishable fire of divine rage nor convert the Jews. We must prayerfully and reverentially practice a merciful severity. Perhaps we may save a few from the fire and flames of hell. We must not seek vengeance. They are surely being punished 1,000 times more than we might wish them. Let me give you my honest advice. And then he goes on to say, first, their synagogue should be set on fire. That was a favorite pastime for some of the early Christians. So the breach with Judaism became quite explicit during the Middle Ages, and through church councils, the dogma of the church, the Roman Catholic Church, became more and more pronounced. So the enmity, the bad regard for Jews was pretty well established when we get to the Middle Ages. And we get to take a look now to Grimm's fairy tales. There were two brothers Grimm, and the movie that came out a few years ago doesn't come close to the truth. Actually, one of the brothers was an editor and kind of refined the German vernacular, and had written an encyclopedia of German use. The Grimm brothers were very staunch Catholics and royalists who railed against what Napoleon had done to what we would call Germany today, but in those days it was mostly Prussia which controlled. And they collected stories from amongst the people in the countryside. And they had one particular woman who was quite adept at telling stories. And essentially, the Grimm's fairy tales, there were 110 of them, are a compilation of the stories that were prevalent. Now, fairy tales are very important in terms of a people's narrative. They tell what the folks believe. They tell us what they fear. They tell us what they love. And the Jew, in the eyes of those in what we now will call Germany, had shown the effects of all the bad bad words issued from the likes of some of the Christian fathers whom I just read a few moments ago. So in 1835 or thereabouts, they compiled their basic group of stories or fairy tales, and this one's about a page and a half to two. It's called The Jew in the Bush. It's sometimes called The Jew in the Thorn Bush, and I do not know if you're going to be able to see this, but there is an unhappy fellow coming out of a thorn bush, and you will soon see him and the reason why. These are bedtime stories. And I believe the German word for a Bible or stories for children is, I don't speak German or read it, let alone write it, but I think the word is Majken. And essentially it is, they're the stories you tell your children. And when you do so, of course, you pass on the traditions as well as the hatreds of your people. So the Jew in the thorn bush. A faithful servant had worked hard for his master, a thrifty farmer, for 3 long years, and had been paid no wages. At last it came into the man's head that he would not go any longer. So he went to his master and said, I have worked hard for you a long time and without pay. I will trust you to give me what I ought to have. What I ought to have for my trouble, but something I must have, and then I must take a holiday. The farmer was a sad miser. Interesting, sad miser. He doesn't pay any wages for 3 years, and he's called a sad miser. The farmer was a sad miser, and knew that his man was simple-hearted. So he took out 3 crowns, and thus gave him a crown for each year's service. The poor fellow thought it was a great deal of money to have, and said to himself, why should I work hard and live here on bad fare any longer? Now that I am rich, I can travel into the wide world and make myself merry. With that, he put his money into his purse and set out, roaming over hill and valley. As he jogged along over the fields, singing and dancing, a little dwarf met him and asked him what made him so merry. Now, of course, we all know when you meet a dwarf, there's magic afoot. Why, what would make me so downhearted, said he. I am sound in health and rich in purse. What should I care for? I have saved up my 3 years' earnings and have it all safe in my pocket. How much may it come to, said the mannikin, meaning the dwarf. 3 whole crowns, replied the countryman. I wish you would give them to me, said the other. I am very poor. Then the good man pitied him and gave him all he had. And the little dwarf said, as you have such a kind heart, I will grant thee 3 wishes, 1 for each crown. So choose whatever you like. Then the countryman rejoiced at his good luck and said, I like many things better than money. First, I will have a bow that I will bring down anything that I shoot at. Secondly, a fiddle that will set everyone dancing that hears me play upon it. And thirdly, I should like to be able to make everyone grant me whatever I wish. The dwarf said he should have his 3 wishes, so he gave him the bow and fiddle and went his way. Our honest friend journeyed on his way too, and if he was merry before, he was now 10 times more so. He had not gone far before he met an old Jew. Close by then stood a tree, and on the topmost twig sat a thrush, singing away most joyfully. "Oh, what a pretty bird," said the Jew. "I would give a great deal of my money to have such a one." "If that's all," said the countryman, "I will soon bring it down." Then he took up his bow, off went his arrow, and down fell the thrush into a bush that grew at the foot of the tree. The Jew, when he saw he could have the bird, thought he could cheat the man. So he put his money into his pocket again and crept into the bush to find the prize. But as soon as he got into the middle, his companion took up his fiddle and played away. And the Jew began to dance and spring about, capering higher and higher in the air. The thorns soon began to tear his clothes, till they all hung in rags about him, and he himself was all scratched and wounded so that the blood ran down. "Oh, for heaven's sake," cried the Jew, "mercy, mercy, master, pray stop the fiddle. What have I done to be treated in this way?" "What hast thou done? Why, thou hast shaved many a poor soul close enough," said the other. Notice the wisdom coming from the simpleton. See, if a Jew has money in fairy tales, he has gotten it by ill means. "Thou art only meeting thy reward," said the countryman. So he played up another tune yet merrier than the first. Then the Jew began to beg and pray, and at last he said he would give plenty of his money to be set free. But he did not come up to the musician's price for some time. Notice what a sharp bargain of the simpleton has become now. The higher the Jew danced, the higher he bid, till at last he offered a round 100 crowns that he had in his purse, and had just gained by cheating some poor fellow. When the countryman saw so much money, he said, "I will agree to the bargain." So he took the purse, put up his fiddle, and traveled on, very well pleased with his bargain. Meanwhile, the Jew crept out of the bush, half naked and in a piteous plight, and began to ponder how he should take his revenge and serve his late companion some trick. At last he went to the judge. He just happened to have a judge standing nearby here. And he said to the judge that a rascal had robbed him of his money and beaten him soundly into the bargain, and that the fellow who did it carried a bow at his back, and he had a fiddle hanging round his neck. Then the judge sent out his bailiff to bring up the man wherever they could find him, so that the poor countryman was soon caught and brought up to be tried. The Jew began to tell his tale and said he had been robbed of his money. "Robbed indeed," said the countryman. "Why, you gave it to me for playing you a tune and teaching you to dance." But the judge told him that was not likely, and that the Jew, to be sure, knew better than what to do with his money. So he cut the matter short by sending him off to the gallows. Pretty hard, tough law. And away he was taken. But as he stood at the foot of the ladder, he said, "My lord judge, may it please your worship to grant me but one boon?" "Anything but thy life," replied the other. "No," said he, "I do not ask for my life. Only let me play one tune upon the fiddle for the last time." The Jew cried out, "No, no, no. For heaven's sake, don't listen to him. Don't listen to him." But the judge said, "It is only for this once, poor man. He will soon have done." The fact was, he could not say no, because the dwarf's third gift enabled him to make everyone grant whatever he wished, whether they liked it or not. Then the Jew said, bind me fast, for pity's sake." But the countryman seized his fiddle and struck up a merry tune, and at the first note, judge, clerks, and jailers were all set a-going, and all began capering, and no one could hold the Jew. At the second note, the hangman let the prisoner go, and danced also, and by the time he had played the first bar of the tune, all were dancing together, judge, court, Jew, and all the people who had followed to look on. At first the thing was merry and joyous enough, but when it had gone on a while, and there seemed to be no end of either playing or dancing, all began to cry out and beg him to leave off. But he stopped not a whit, the more for the begging, till the judge not only gave him his life, but paid him back the 100 crowns. Then he called to the Jew and said, "Tell us now, you rogue, where you got that gold, or I shall play on for your amusement." "I stole it," said the Jew, before all the people. "I acknowledge that I stole it and that you earned it fairly." Then the countryman stopped his fiddle and left the Jew to take his place at the gallows. Grimm's Fairy Tales. What's the lesson? It's not good for the Jews. Now, there only may be 3 such explicitly anti-Semitic stories in Grimm's fairy tales, but they make it very clear what the people, the townspeople, the country folk believed. And through fairy tales, we have tremendous expressions of anti-Semitism. We don't have time for me to read a Mother Goose story with a particular twist about a rogue Jew, but I assure you that not only do you find this in folklore, but also the illustrations for children. And Crookshank comes to mind in England as one who did some particular, a lot of caricatures or stereotyping of Jews. Well, let's move on. I want to talk now about the Dreyfus trial. The Dreyfus trial began in 1794. It was the trial of an assimilated Jew who had lived in Alsace, which became part of France in the back and forth wars with the Prussians, and then was captured again by the Prussians in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71. Alfred Dreyfus was an artillery captain and was part of the lesser general staff. The intrigues of this story are too complicated to go into any detail. Suffice it to say that a descendant of the Esterhazy family, a rogue and a philanderer, a gambler who kept a mistress, was the one who actually sold secrets, including plans of military installations of the French to the Germans. When the general staff became concerned about it, they settled upon Alfred Dreyfus as the culprit. It was a trumped-up charge. They had no real evidence, and Dreyfus was tried essentially in camera, that is, in a closed court hearing at the military, near the central military, like not like our Pentagon, but a place called Rennes. He was found guilty, and he was humiliated in front of the entire military corps when his commanding officer broke his sword, stripped off his epaulets and all of his medals. And Dreyfus was sentenced, I think, to a 12-year term in Devil's Island, off the coast of Vienna in South America. The trial reeked of anti-Semitism, both from the part of the general staff, but also in the local people, who were stirred up by a number of anti-Semitic newspapers. In Paris in 1894, there were between 25 and 30 newspapers. Some of them, like La Libre Parole, were extremely anti-Semitic. The publisher, a fellow named Drumont, was a Jew baiter, and he kind of led the charge. And it will be significant when we get to the case of Leo Frank. We will talk about another newspaper man who figured prominently. In other words, the yokels have to be stirred up by somebody, and very often the yellow press will do it. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to quote from Barbara Tuchman's The Proud Tower. This is a wonderful piece of literature and a wonderful historical account. And in chapter 4, entitled Give Me Combat, she gives a précis of what was going on in France. If you think our country was divided during this past election, it pales in significance to what was going on in France. In the 100 years since Napoleon, France had gone through 8 to 10 different forms of government. They had a republic, they had an autocracy, they had a revolution, not the French Revolution, but the one that took place in the 1830s that only lasted for a few days. The Commune, it was called. There were so many factions in French society, and the French nation had been humiliated by losing the Franco-Prussian War, 1870, that the military pined, drank toast to revenge. If you are a reader of Proust, Proust describes his friend in the military with whom he would go out drinking. And he noted that all of the young officers spoke about the day of revenge. And so the French nation looked to the army to give it revenge against Prussia. And the army was worshipped for delivering the French nation and bringing back the days of glory. Although the French were known for being anti-clerical, the Roman Catholic Church still had an awful lot of power. And those who were loyalists to the church or loyalists to the army would never second guess anything that was pronounced. The church was also very anti-Semitic. So here we have Dreyfus languishing, actually not languishing, he was wasting away because he was lost weight and was not being well fed. He had medical issues as well. And to move things along, I will just quote a few things to try to give you some flavor of the anti-Semitic feelings. A little background she gives us. Always, however, in political life, the nation was at odds with itself, galled from within by the unreconciled, unsubdued adherents of the Anshan regime and the Second Empire, oppressed from without by the superior strength of Germany and the sense of unfinished war between them, hankering for revanche without the means to achieve it. In 1889, discontent with the Republic came to a head in the attempted coup d'état of General Boulanger, supported by all the elements of the counter-revolution who made up the collective right, the church, the 200 families of business and finance, the displaced aristocracy, the royalists and the followers and the sympathizers of these groups. Boulanger's attempt ended in a fiasco memorable for the remark of the Premier Charles Floquet. At your age, General, Napoleon was dead. Nevertheless, his attempt shook the Republic and stirred up both the expectations and the frustrations of the right. There is a parallel between this regard for the turmoil in the French nation and the same turmoil in England at the time when Shakespeare wrote The Merchant of Venice, because it was after Henry VIII had set up the Church of England, which broke with the Church of Rome. And as a result, people didn't know, as we say in Maine, whether they were on foot or on horseback. In terms of what's the right religion, who's correct. So that kind of turmoil is what James Shapiro says in an essay on Shakespeare and the Jews, when he addresses the question whether Shakespeare was anti-Semitic. So if you've got a public that's in turmoil and they're trying to reach out to grab hold of some verity, some truth that they can believe in, some guidance through their life, any new intervention of an issue puts the public at ill ease and creates a tremendous amount of social unrest. The arrest, trial, conviction, and sentencing of Captain Alfred Dreyfus, an artillery officer assigned to the General Staff, which took place in the months of October to December 1894, was not a deliberate plot to frame an innocent man. It was the outcome of a reasonable suspicion acted on by dislike, some circumstantial evidence, and instinctive prejudice. Evidence indicated betrayal of military secrets to Germany by some artillery officer on the General Staff. Dreyfus, besides fitting the requirement, was a Jew, the eternal alien, a natural suspect to absorb the stain of treason. And they go on. Dreyfus was not a hail fellow well met. He talked kind of softly. He was very retiring. He didn't go out drinking with the boys. And in some respects, he was an outsider, not only as a Jew, but also as a military officer. The army was both a defender of the nation and an instrument of revanche. It was the means of restoring someday the national glory. Men lifted their hats when the colonel and the colors at the head of the regiment marched by. In the words of a character whom Anatole France was satirizing, though not misrepresenting, the army is all that is left of our glorious past. It consoles us for the present and gives us hope for the future. The army was les braves gens. In the course of the affair, it became the prisoner of its friends, clerics, royalists, anti-Semites, nationalists, and all the anti-Republican groups who made its honor the rallying cry of their own causes, for their own purposes. Caught in the trap of its early commitment to Dreyfus's guilt, and of the forgeries and machinations by its officers to establish the guilt, the army's honor became synonymous with maintenance of the original verdict. It was a fort to be defended against revision. So there was a movement to try to retry or appeal the results of the trial, all to no effect. Suffice it to say that it all got blown up when Emile Zola, writing for the L'Aurore newspaper, wrote J'accuse, and he accused the president of France of complicity in the cover-up of this miscarriage of justice. and I'm skipping a little bit here, to say the least, to move things along. J'Accuse drew world attention to the affair and gave its proportions of heroic drama. That the French army could be accused of such crimes and the French author best known to the foreign public be attacked in such terms was equally astounding. The world watched with stupor and distress, wrote Bjornsson from Norway. When the trial opened, the Dreyfusards were conscious of that audience. The scene is France, the theater is the world, they said. The trial transformed the affair from the local to the universal. Zola was charged with a crime of defaming the army and the name of France. It was essentially a civil trial that he was willing to take on, but there were criminal penalties. And under the circumstances, he was found guilty, and he fled to England to get away from the verdict and the judgment of the court. Meanwhile, there were anti-Semitic riots organized by Drummond. He's the owner,
Events on January 6th.
Owner of the newspaper. And he was paying people so many sous a day to picket and yell death to the Jews, down with the Jews, long live the army, spit on Zola. When Zola left the court on one occasion in company with another person, the crowd flew at them, yelling, drown the traitors, death to the Jews. Haven't we heard that recently? It was fascinating. If you read Proust, there's about 100 pages dealing with one of the salons of one of Swann's patrons. And you've got 100 pages of what was going on in France, from the nobility down to the people on the street. Eventually, the revision in this case meaning that they should retry him. And he was retried, and he was found by the court guilty again, 5-2, even after they were able to provide evidence of the fraud perpetrated on the court by the general staff. And certain questions were not answered. I can't see this happening today, certainly not in an American court. I mean, for those of us who are trained in the law, it makes you want to scream. It's like going to see the movie with Dustin Hoffman, Kramer against Kramer. And I can remember sitting behind a local judge. It was Judge Bob Donovan's father. These questions are asked, and I said, pardon me, I'm going to curse. I said, for Christ's sake, cross-examine them. So, you have the sense of outrage. It's like, how can this happen? Well, that, absolute power corrupts. There was the final court was called the Court of Cassation, meaning breakage. Don't ask me, I don't know, it's France. And they were going to review the whole thing. And in that court, there were like 46 judges who said that he should be found guilty, but he should be discharged from custody because he had already served 4 years. And of course, it's very dramatic when they describe how Dreyfus looked when he came into the court. He was a shrunken man. He was destroyed physically. Eventually, he was pardoned, but he was asked to accept that. In fact, he basically told his defense counsel, I can't do this anymore. by this time, he had been under custody or in prison for 8 years. This trial essentially ends and he is reinstated after 12 years, from 1894 to 1906 or 7 or thereabouts. Anyway, the drama that Tuckman provides in describing this trial, the stain on justice, it's a stain on France. Eventually, the right result, but although Dreyfus was reinstated and put in a position that he would have earned as a general, he was a broken man as a result of it. A news reporter from Die Welt, a Viennese newspaper by the name of help me, Rabbi. I've got a blank spot.
About Herzl?
Yes, thank you.
Theodore Herzl.
Herzl, meanwhile, is reporting back to the folks at home, and that wasn't a hard question. I just went blank, and he was very disturbed at what he saw with the crowds. And it was one thing for an iron-bound institution like the French army and its offices, but for the public to cry for the death of Jews, death to the Jews, was very upsetting to him. Now, he was an assimilated Jew, but he still had a feeling for his people, and so disturbed that he was convinced that there was only one way the Jews could be protected in this world, and that was to have a nation of their own. And of course, that vision is contained in Der Judenrat, that is the Jewish state, in which he foretells the need to have a nation for the Jewish people. And the realization eventually came about 40 to 50 years thereafter, on May 14th, 1948. But not without some additional difficulties. British rule, which was granted in the Palestinian Mandate, but that comes in 1920. And we really have another event that we should talk about. Unfortunately, giving evidence to the same kind of historical experience as the Dreyfus trial, and I refer now to the Leo Frank case. The Leo Frank case, I have a manuscript of by Leonard Dinnerstein. This was his PhD dissertation from Columbia University. And I, in similar fashion to my reading of Tuckman, I want to avoid a lot of the ins and outs of a trial, which are great copy for lawyers, but we could put everyone to sleep. But bear with me, and we'll see what happened in America. So here we have how many nations? Egypt, Greece, Rome, the emerging Roman Empire, which became Christian. We've talked about France. We've talked about England and the expulsion of Jews in 1290. So here we are in America. And In his introduction, Leonard Dinnerstein says that this book deals with the story of populism, the growing pains of the South, of Jews in the Bible Belt, and exposes an injustice committed in the United States during the Progressive Era. The ambivalence that the Southerners felt toward Jews, the poor judgment that some Jews made when trying to defend Frank and obtain a new trial for him, are all displayed in this story that is very painful to read. It also speaks about the late 19th century and early 20th century, where industrialization was very strong in the North and was growing in the South. Many people in rural Southern communities or countryside were lured to come into the cities where they could get employment. Factories, which were controlled and demanding by the bosses, provided challenges because they didn't have child labor laws in those days. And the long hours, and in some cases lascivious employers, posed other protections, or I should say problems, for the protection of women. And here we touch upon the issue of the virtue of Southern womanhood, which is a key component of this unfortunate story. There was a growing resentment of labor because of management practices. And overall, there was a terrible resentment of the South for the North, the imposition of Northern culture on the South. After all, we're only, 48 years or so from 1865 and the end of the Civil War. So the story is about a little girl who was 11 years old, who worked in the factory and had come when very few people were in the factory, because it was a celebration of Southern, the Southern, it's kind of like a Memorial Day for those who were killed in the Civil War. And for those of us who know anything about life in the South, we know that the Southern heritage and the battle of Northern aggression, or the war of Northern aggression as the Southerners see it, was a strong dividing line. This little girl comes to get her pay from Leo Frank, who's the manager. Leo Frank is a Jew from Brooklyn. He's a Cornell graduate, and he's working in his uncle's pencil factory in the Marietta, Georgia area. He pays the girl, and her body is found a day later at the bottom of an elevator shaft in the factory. At the trial, there are people who come to testify that Frank was regarded as being too chummy, friendly. He talked up with some of the young women, teenagers who worked in the factory. Here we're talking about Mary Fagan, an 11-year-old girl. So the purity, and she was sexually assaulted on top of it all. It was perjured testimony. There was circumstantial evidence. A lot of people have expressed opinions as to whether Leo Frank was guilty or innocent. Dinnerstein says innocent. Some other noteworthy people concluded as such. But during the warm summer, because this occurred in April of 1913, so the weather is hot down south, and the windows of the courthouse are open for ventilation. And the townsfolk are coming in and they're speaking and people are churning them up. And we have the person of Tom Watson, who was the publisher of the Jeffersonian. And he was utterly convinced of Frank's guilt. And he said so in his newspaper. And he urged other people, anybody who would listen to him, to cry the influence of Yankee Jew managers running factories and disrupting their community and committing heinous crimes. Meanwhile, up north, the president of the American Jewish Committee used his influence in an attempt to change Southern attitudes. He induced Alfred Ochs, the publisher of the New York Times, and also a member of the American Jewish Committee, to employ his newspaper as a weapon in the fight to exonerate Frank. It's an interesting story. The Times thereupon embarked on a protracted campaign to obtain another trial. Oh yeah, he was found guilty very quickly, as a matter of fact. Because of this, the publisher of the newspaper, the Jeffersonian, Tom Watson, decried Jewish money buying expensive legal talent. And the mere exercising of legal rights to take an appeal was regarded as another affront by wealthy Yankee Jews. The judge thought that he had a fair trial, and there was a finding of guilty, as I said, and he was sentenced to be hanged, executed. And he went to a prison farm because his life was in danger for being lynched. The governor commuted his sentence. His name was Slavin, a name that should live in honor for the courage that this governor had when public opinion was so strongly against Leo Frank and his innocence. And efforts were made for a new trial. While he was at this prison farm, a group of 20 odd, actually closer to 30, I think, people from the Marietta, Georgia, drove in broad daylight to the farm and abducted him, brought him closer to Marietta, and hanged him from a tall oak tree. Summary justice in the South. Another case where the publisher of a newspaper gets inflamed in the public to generate more hatred for Jews. I see time has flown. And is there a question? I see a chat. Bob, is there something out there?
There was a question or a statement. A question really says BDS is a big movement against Israel, maybe a form of anti-Semitism. You familiar with that at all?
Yes, I am. Well, it's very prominent in many college campuses. I think BDS got started out in California, and I'm thinking San Diego or Santa Clara. And on campuses throughout the country, Justice for Palestinians is a causing a great deal of difficulty for Jewish students. There are a lot of Jewish students who don't know anything about the struggle to establish a state of Israel. And they don't know, if you will, the narrative of the Jewish people's reaching a state of their own. And as a result, they're intimidated, and a lot of the public demonstration by the Palestinians and those who support them has been physically intimidating, if not menacing. And it's caused a great deal of difficulty for the kids who don't know what's going on. I know at Bowdoin College here in Brunswick, Maine, just north of where I live, the student body voted against support for BDS, which is quite a remarkable thing. Unfortunately, on college campuses, the juxtaposition of Israel as Goliath and the Palestinians as David has captured a lot of attention. And what's very sad is that Jewish kids are being put in a difficult situation because they're not equipped when they leave home to know about the facts as we understand them, and to be able to speak up for their own people. It's very uncomfortable, and I fear that it will continue to grow, notwithstanding, the fact that people who support Hamas, as opposed to the Palestinian Authority, for one example, Hamas has had in its charter since 1988, and even through a revision in 2017, they still believe in the expulsion of the Jews from the river to the sea. It's a very sad situation, and I fear that we as parents and adults are not educating our kids on how to protect and defend themselves in debate. Well, I've got about 8:35. Let me just end with one very abbreviated, give you a 5-minute rendition of the St. Louis affair. The St. Louis affair involves a German steamship. The Jews had purchased passage to Cuba to get away from Germany in 1939. They left in May, and they got to Cuba and were turned away. There was no choice but to turn back. The captain of the ship was very accommodating to his Jewish passengers. Meanwhile, Goebbels had seen to it that there were many people in Cuba who protested the allowance of Jews to disembark. And he kept saying, nobody will accept the Jews. And he said that because there had been a conference in 1938 in Evian, France, which the United States had requested to try to get some of the nations, the United Nations as it then existed, is before the UN, I understand, was formed in 45, but the nascent or the proto-UN, to get certain countries to accept Jews, but the United States and Britain didn't do so. And as a result, for various reasons, none of which were acceptable by our standards today. And so the Jews returned back. Finally, on a humanitarian basis, the American Joint Distribution Committee was able to get Britain to take 230 Jews, the Netherlands to take another 100 or so, France took another 100 to 200, but the rest of them were returned to Germany and they perished in the camps. Those who got off in the Netherlands or in France also wound up dying in the crematoria. Those who went to England were fortunate. And the United States refused entry for the Jewish passengers. And I suggested to Robert before the program tonight that for a program in the future, you might wish to consider a motion picture called Complicit, which deals with the SS of the ship, and brings a complaint in a mock trial, a criminal complaint against President Roosevelt for not allowing the Jews to disembark. There's an interesting story about the lack of action taken by anti-Semites at the State Department, starting with Cordell Hull, Breckinridge Long, who was in charge of immigration in particular, and how Henry Morgan Jr. attempted to bring this to Roosevelt's attention, and how, as a result of his efforts, the War Refugee Board was established. Unfortunately, it was much too late because it was after the war. But complicit is a charge that our country, the United States, could and should have done more to save Jews and did not. And the story bears a further examination, and I commend it for your consideration. Well, I think that about wraps it up.
Anyone have any questions they'd like to unmute and ask Matt? Well, Matt, thank you very much for spending the time and putting together this program for the past 3 weeks. And I'm sure we could probably take 3 years to study this topic in depth between all the authors you've mentioned and the political situations that occurred along the way, and the fact that the Jewish people have been in such dire situations for so long. Our survival is truly a blessing. And I, again, thank you for helping to make us more aware of these pieces. I think Rabbi Fine will be actually doing a lecture, his lecture series starting in the fall on anti-Semitism. So you've given us a bit of a introduction as he will go and continue to share this topic, and it's important, as you certainly have let us know. And I thank you for taking the time to do this and sharing this with our congregation and everyone who joined us tonight. So we've got a lot of authors, a lot to think about, and we know this is a topic that we have to keep in everyone's presence, because, as always, those who forget history are doomed to repeat what has come before. So thank you again, and on behalf of Temple Israel and our speaker series, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you. I know James is very proud to have you as a speaker here, and you've kept the bar quite high in making our programs very worthwhile. And this will be recorded and will be on our website and can be reviewed by anyone at a later point. Stacy, who's in charge of our website, Stacy will wave so we know who she is, will certainly help make sure that our program gets there. And along with the other programs, we have a library now of worthwhile programs to see, and this series has been one. So Matt, thank you again. It's been terrific. Just for everyone's edification, next week, same time, same place, we have Mac Brandon from the Metropolitan AME Zion Church. A really stimulating discussion, finding ourselves in community, where will our faith lead us? This is a church, a Black church in Ridgewood that he leads, and he's a dynamic speaker, and we will have a very provocative conversation about the status of our world, the Jews' engagement in this process, and as a part of what our contemporary times are talking about. And that will also add to our repertoire of quality speakers. So thank you, everyone. I want to wish everyone a wonderful and warm continued summer. Stay out of the rain, and be happy and use these summer days because they'll go quickly by. And I know how we all hate that. Suddenly we turn around. As I was saying to Matt at the beginning, we'll get to August 29th and boom, it'll be the high holidays. Surprise. So without expecting it, it'll be here before we know it. Matt, any last words?
Well, I enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful, and thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thank you again. We really appreciate it. It's been an honor working with you, and I look forward to seeing you at the high holidays.
Yes, indeed. Six weeks.
That's right. All right. James is getting his speech ready, and I know that it'll all work out terrific. All right. You know, his appeal and all the good news that he's going to have to share. So
Time to make the matzo balls.
That's about right. So you got some thanks in chat, and we really do appreciate your spending the time with us. So I want to wish everyone a lovely evening, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening, and thanks very much again. Good night.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Dad. See you, Leo.
Yep.
See you
Bye-bye.
later. Great job, Dad.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
I brought my clack.